This content is entirely fictional and does not promote violence, crime, or illegal organizations. This story illustrates the psychological and legal consequences of organized crime. The morning heat pressed against the windows of Russo Logistics like an unwanted visitor, making the air conditioning work overtime in the Chicago warehouse district. Claire Morrison adjusted the collar of her blouse for the third time that morning, the fabric scratching against skin that still felt raw despite the concealer she had layered on at 5 in the morning. The bathroom mirror had shown her what she already knew. No amount of makeup could hide what she was trying to conceal. Not really. It just made the lie more elaborate, more desperate, more pathetic. Her fingers trembled slightly as she sorted through the morning correspondence scattered across her desk. A stack of invoices and shipping manifests that needed review before the 9 o'clock logistics meeting. 4 months she had worked here now. 4 months of learning the rhythm of this place, the patterns of import schedules and delivery routes, the careful dance of numbers that flowed through Russo Logistics like blood through veins. Black coffee, no sugar, for Mr. Russo when he arrived. Reports organized by urgency, not alphabetically, because that was how he preferred to see his day laid out before him. Phone calls screened with polite firmness but never rudeness, because reputation mattered in this business, whatever this business actually was. 4 months of watching Dante Russo command rooms with nothing more than his presence, of seeing grown men stumble over their words when he asked a simple question, of noticing how conversations stopped when he entered and resumed only after he left, different now, careful now, measured in ways that made her stomach tighten with something she did not want to name. The bruise on her left forearm throbbed beneath the long sleeves of her blouse. July in Chicago, and she was dressed for October, layered and covered and hiding. The other women in the office had already made comments, gentle inquiries wrapped in concern that she had deflected with practiced ease, with the smile she had perfected over 2 years of explaining away things that should not need explaining. "I run cold," she had said, keeping her voice light and easy. Office buildings are always freezing. They had nodded and moved on because people always moved on when you gave them permission to stop asking. Emma had noticed too. Her daughter, 6 years old and far too observant, had touched the sleeve that morning at breakfast and asked why Mommy was wearing winter clothes when it was hot outside. Claire had laughed it off, had made it a game, had distracted her with promises of ice cream after school. Emma had accepted it because children that age still believed their mothers, still trusted that the world made sense if you just asked the right questions. But the world did not make sense. Not Claire's world, not for a long time now. Russo's voice cut through her thoughts, smooth and controlled as always, carrying across the open office floor with that particular quality of command that made everyone straighten unconsciously. "Claire, my office. Now, please, not a request. Never quite a request with men like Dante Russo. But not a threat either. Not the way Richard used to make everything sound like a threat. Every word weighted with the possibility of violence, of consequences, of pain measured out in careful doses designed to remind her of her place. She gathered the morning reports, checking her collar one more time before crossing the threshold into his domain. The office smelled of leather and expensive cologne, underlaid with something she had come to associate specifically with him. Control, measured and absolute, the scent of a man who had learned long ago that showing emotion was showing weakness, and weakness in his world was something that got you killed or worse. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the warehouse district, the Chicago skyline visible in the distance, but Dante rarely looked at the view. His attention was always focused inward, on whatever problem needed solving, whatever business required his particular brand of resolution. He stood by the window now, his back to her, hands clasped behind him in a posture that reminded her of military bearing, of training that went deeper than business school, of skills learned in harder classrooms than any university offered. Close the door. Her hand hesitated on the handle. They had been alone before, countless times, but something in his tone felt different today, sharper, more focused, like the moment before a storm when the air pressure drops and every animal instinct you possess screams at you to take cover. She pushed the door shut and heard the soft click of the latch engaging, that small sound suddenly loud in the quiet office, final in a way that made her pulse quicken. "The manifests need your signature," she began, moving toward his desk with the folder extended, professional and efficient. The mask she wore better than any makeup, better than any lie she told herself in the mirror each morning. And the shipping coordinator called about the delay on the Rotterdam container. "Why are you wearing long sleeves in July?" The question landed like a physical blow, unexpected and precise, cutting through her prepared script of business and routine. She had expected many things from Dante Russo. Demands about numbers, questions about schedules, the casual exercise of authority that came as naturally to him as breathing. But not this. Not curiosity about her wardrobe choices, not attention paid to details that should have been beneath his notice. "I told you, I run cold. The air conditioning in here is excessive." "You are sweating." He turned from the window, and his dark eyes fixed on her with that intensity that made her want to step back, to look away, to run. "Your collar is damp. Try again." Her throat constricted. She could feel the heat radiating from her face, could smell her own fear mixing with the subtle scent of the concealer she had applied with shaking hands in the pre-dawn darkness of her bathroom, while Emma slept in the next room, innocent and safe, and unaware that her mother was falling apart one bruise at a time. "Mr. Russo, I really do not think this is appropriate workplace conversation." Dante, his hand reached out, not touching, just hovering near her shoulder, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "You have worked for me for 4 months. You call me Dante when we are alone. You know that." She did know that. It was one of the first things he had told her during her interview, delivered with the same absolute certainty he brought to every declaration, every instruction, every order disguised as a suggestion. No Mr. Russo behind closed doors. No, sir. No boss. Just Dante, as if the informality could somehow bridge the canyon between his world and hers, as if a first-name basis made them equals when nothing about their relationship was equal, when every paycheck reminded her exactly who held the power here. The manifests. She tried again, holding the folder like a shield between them, like paper and ink could protect her from questions she did not want to answer. "You have a meeting at 9. "I will reschedule." He took the folder from her hands, set it on the desk without looking at it, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "What happened to your arm?" Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat painful and loud in her ears. "Nothing happened to my arm." "Show me." "That is inappropriate." The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with panic. "That is an inappropriate request from an employer." Something flickered in his eyes, there and gone too quickly for her to name, too complex to parse in the moment. "You are right. It is." He stepped back, giving her space she had not realized she needed, had not known she was desperate for until he provided it. "So I am asking as someone who is concerned. Please show me your arm." The please undid her. Men like Dante Russo did not say please. Did not ask when they could simply take, when they could demand, when they held all the cards and you held nothing but fear and the vain hope that today would not be the day everything fell apart. She had watched him negotiate shipping contracts that would make lesser men weep, had seen him dismiss managers with a single cutting remark, had witnessed the way people moved around him like he was the sun and they were planets caught in his gravity, unable to escape, not really wanting to. But now he stood before her, waiting, and the pleas hung in the air between them like an offering, like a door she could choose to open or keep closed, like the first real choice she had been given in longer than she could remember. Her hands moved to her sleeve before she could stop them, before rational thought could intervene and remind her of all the reasons this was a terrible idea, before fear could lock her muscles and freeze her in place the way it had frozen her so many times before. The fabric slid up, exposing the mottled purple and yellow that bloomed across her forearm like some grotesque flower, spreading from wrist to elbow in patterns that told a story she had tried so hard to hide, had worked so desperately to conceal beneath layers of clothing and makeup and lies that were wearing thinner every day. She heard his sharp intake of breath, watched his hands curl into fists at his sides, saw the muscle jump in his jaw as he processed what he was seeing, what it meant, what it said about her life outside these walls. Who did this to you? The question came out flat, emotionless, and somehow that was worse than if he had shouted, worse than anger, worse than pity, worse than anything she had prepared herself to face. It is not what you think. Then tell me what it is. He moved to the windows, putting his back to her, giving her the privacy of his inattention, the grace of not having to meet his eyes while she explained the unexplainable. Tell me what I should think when my accountant comes to work in July wearing winter clothes and 3 layers of makeup to hide bruises that look like someone grabbed her hard enough to leave finger marks. The story spilled out before she could stop it, before she could remember all the reasons silence was safer, before she could recall that sharing made you vulnerable and vulnerability was dangerous, and danger was something she had promised herself she would avoid at all costs after the last time, after the hospital, after the restraining order that Richard violated within a week because restraining orders were just paper and paper did not stop fists. Richard Morrison, her ex-husband who was not quite ex enough, who still had keys to apartments she no longer lived in, who still knew her schedule and Emma's school and all the soft places where she could be hurt. The man she had married at 23 because he seemed stable and safe and nothing like her father, not realizing that different flavors of danger still tasted bitter in the end. The escalation that had been so gradual she had not noticed until it was too late, until normal meant walking on eggshells, until love meant apologizing for things that were not her fault, until marriage meant wondering which version of him would come through the door each night. She had left him 18 months ago, filed for divorce, gotten the restraining order, moved 3 times to apartments he somehow always found. He had money, connections, a family with lawyers and influence, and the kind of respectability that made judges hesitate to believe a woman claiming abuse when the man in question coached Little League, and donated to charity, and showed up to court in expensive suits with character witnesses who swore he would never hurt anyone. Last night he had been waiting outside her current apartment. Drunk or high or just mean, she could not tell anymore, could not read the signs the way she used to when reading them meant survival. Emma was at a friend's house for a sleepover, thank God, because Claire did not want to think about what would have happened if her daughter had been there, had witnessed what came next. The grab, the shove, the familiar feeling of powerlessness as he pinned her against the wall of the parking garage and reminded her that she belonged to him, that leaving did not mean free, that divorce papers were just more paper and paper meant nothing, nothing at all. A neighbor had interrupted. Old Mrs. Chen from 3 be walking her ancient terrier, and Richard had released her, had smoothed his jacket and smiled that smile he used in public, the one that made people think he was charming, and walked away like nothing had happened, like he had not just committed assault, like the restraining order was a suggestion rather than a legal mandate. Claire had called the police, again, filed another report, again, been told they would follow up, again, and nothing would happen, again, Because it always played out the same way, the same script, the same hollow promises, the same realization that she was alone in this, that the system designed to protect her was a maze of paperwork and procedures that moved too slowly to stop a man who moved fast when he wanted to hurt you. I got away, she finished, her voice barely above a whisper, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. I am fine. He did not really do anything this time, just scared me. Just reminded me that he can reach me whenever he wants. Dante turned back to her, and what she saw in his face made her breath catch in her throat. Not pity. She had learned to recognize that particular expression, had seen it in the eyes of police officers and lawyers and well-meaning friends who offered sympathy but no solutions, who said they understood when they could not possibly understand, who moved on with their lives while she remained trapped in hers. This was something else, something colder and infinitely more dangerous. Where is he now? Richard, I mean, where can I find him? She knew that tone. Had heard it before in other contexts, in phone calls she was not supposed to overhear, in conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, in the careful language men used when they were planning things that existed in shadows, in the spaces between legal and not, in the gray areas where power operated outside the constraints of law. I do not know, probably at his apartment on the north side. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the summer heat pressing against the windows. It does not matter. The police know. They have it documented. He will slip up eventually and they will arrest him, and maybe this time the judge will actually enforce the restraining order. It matters. He crossed back to her, stopped close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixing with something sharper, something that reminded her of gunmetal and old leather and choices made in the dark. Give me his address. I will take care of it. And there it was. The offer she had been afraid of since the moment she realized what kind of man Dante Russo actually was, since the day she had found the discrepancies in the books, since the hour she had understood that Russo logistics was not just about importing olive oil and fine wines from Italy, since the minute she had opened the file labeled miscellaneous consulting fees and seen the numbers that did not add up to anything legitimate. The offer wrapped in concern, but hiding something she recognized all too well. Violence answering violence. Power asserting itself through force. Men solving problems the way men always solved problems, with fists and blood and consequences that ricocheted through lives like bullets through walls, hitting targets you never intended, destroying things you never meant to break. No, she took a step back, felt the desk press against her legs, had nowhere else to go but held her ground anyway because backing down now meant something she could not afford to mean. No, Dante. I appreciate the offer, I really do, but I do not need you to take care of it. You do not know what I am thinking of doing. Yes, I do. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, stronger than she had any right to sound when her whole body was shaking with adrenaline and fear, and something that might have been hope if hope was not such a dangerous thing to feel. I know exactly what you are thinking of doing. I have seen the books, Dante. I know what miscellaneous consulting fees means. I know what problems you solve and how you solve them, and I am telling you no. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. She could see him processing her refusal, could almost hear the calculations running behind those dark eyes, could sense the part of him that was not used to being told no, that did not understand the word when it came from someone with less power, less money, less ability to enforce their will upon the world. Why, the single word carried genuine confusion, as if her rejection of violence was incomprehensible, as if choosing not to fight fire with fire was a foreign concept in his universe of action and reaction, of debts and payments, of scores that needed settling. Because I am afraid. The truth escaped before she could dress it in more palatable language, before she could soften it with euphemism or hide it behind professional distance. I am afraid of what you will do. I am afraid of what it means to owe someone like you a favor. I am afraid that your kind of help comes with a price I cannot afford to pay. I am afraid that once you start solving my problems your way, I will never be able to solve them any other way. I am afraid that I will become dependent on violence to feel safe, and that is exactly what Richard did to me. He made me afraid. I will not trade one source of fear for another, even if the second one wears expensive suits and remembers how I take my coffee. Understanding dawned across his features, followed by something that might have been hurt if men like him were capable of such vulnerability. If they allowed themselves to feel things that made them weak, that made them human, that made them anything other than the controlled and controlling forces they had trained themselves to be. He nodded slowly, stepped back, gave her room to breathe, space to exist without the weight of his presence pressing down on her like atmosphere, like gravity, like inevitability. I understand. His voice had returned to its usual measured control, the brief glimpse of something more human disappearing behind the mask of authority he wore so well, so comfortably, so completely that she wondered if there was anything underneath it anymore, or if the mask had become the man. But I am going to ask you to do something for me, not as your employer, as someone who would like to ensure your safety. She waited, barely breathing, knowing that whatever came next would change things, would shift the dynamic between them in ways she could not predict, could not control, could not stop. Let me assign someone to watch over you, discreetly. You will not even know he is there most of the time. He pulled out his phone, typed quickly. His name is Marco. He is good at his job, and his job will be to make sure Richard does not come near you or your daughter again. That is not necessary. It is already done. He looked up from his phone, and the expression on his face was pure Dante Russo, immovable and absolute, carved from stone and will, and decades of getting exactly what he wanted through patience or pressure or the careful application of both. This is not negotiable, Claire. You can refuse my help with Richard directly. You can tell me no as many times as you need to, but you cannot stop me from ensuring my employees' safety. Consider it a workplace perk. Health insurance, dental, and protection from violent ex-husbands. It is all in the benefits package. She should have argued, should have insisted on her independence, on her ability to handle her own problems the way she had always handled them, alone and afraid, but at least in control of her own choices, her own consequences, her own life. But exhaustion pulled at her, the kind that came from too many years of being strong when she wanted nothing more than to collapse, from too many nights lying awake listening for footsteps in the hallway, from too many mornings covering bruises and lying to her daughter about why Mommy was so jumpy, so tired, so very close to breaking. And beneath the exhaustion, something else whispered seductively in her ear, in her heart, in the part of her that was so tired of fighting alone. What if you let someone help? Just this once. Just for now. Just until you can breathe again without wondering if today is the day Richard goes too far, if today is the day Emma loses her mother, because restraining orders are paper and paper burns so easily. Okay. The word felt like surrender and relief in equal measure, like giving up and being saved, like losing and winning a battle she had not known she was fighting. Thank you. Dante nodded, already turning his attention back to business, to the manifests that needed signing, and the meetings that needed rescheduling, and the empire that needed managing. As if the last 10 minutes had not happened, as if they had not just negotiated the terms of her protection, as if everything was normal and fine and exactly as it should be. But as she gathered the forgotten folder and moved toward the door, his voice stopped her one more time. Claire. She turned back, found him watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher, could not quite name, could not quite believe was directed at her. I am not him. Whatever you are afraid I will become, whatever you think I am capable of, I would never hurt you. I need you to know that. I need you to believe it even if you cannot believe anything else about me or this place or the work we do here. I would never hurt you." The declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with sincerity she was not sure how to process, was not prepared to accept, was afraid to trust because trust had betrayed her before, and betrayal was a wound that never quite healed, that ached in the cold and bled when you least expected it. She nodded, not trusting her voice, not knowing what to say to a man who had just promised her safety while admitting he was dangerous, who had offered protection while acknowledging he was a threat, who wanted her to believe in his restraint while running an empire built on the absence of it. She escaped to the safety of her desk outside his office, sank into her chair, and tried to remember how to breathe normally, how to think clearly, how to reconcile the man who had just seen her bruises with the man whose books showed payments to people who made problems disappear in ways that left no paper trail, no evidence, no proof beyond the suddenly empty chairs at family dinners, and the obituaries that blamed accidents and natural causes and anything but the truth. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Marco. Gray Honda Civic parked across the street. Do not look for me. Just know I am here. If Richard comes within 50 feet of you or your daughter, I will know. Stay safe, Miss Morrison." She glanced out the window without thinking, caught a glimpse of the vehicle he had mentioned, saw nothing else, no one watching, no sign of surveillance. But she felt it anyway, felt the weight of protection settling over her like a blanket, like armor, like the promise of sleep without nightmares for the first time in 18 months. The bruises would fade. She knew they always did, knew the body healed even when the mind could not, knew that in 2 weeks the yellow would turn to green, would turn to nothing, would disappear as if Richard had never touched her, as if violence was temporary and forgiveness was possible and moving on was something she could actually do. But as she turned back to her work, pulling up the shipping schedules that needed updating before the 9 o'clock meeting Dante would not be attending, she wondered if this feeling, this strange combination of fear and hope and something she did not want to name, would prove just as temporary, just as fleeting, just as ephemeral as the marks on her skin. 3 weeks passed like water through cupped hands, slipping away before she could hold them, before she could examine them too closely, before she could decide if the sense of safety she felt was real or just another illusion she was crafting to survive. Richard did not appear outside her apartment again, did not wait by Emma's school, did not show up at the grocery store or the park or any of the dozen places she had trained herself to avoid, to fear, to navigate with the constant awareness of a prey animal in predator territory. Marco remained invisible. She saw the gray Honda sometimes, parked at different locations, never the same spot twice, always positioned where someone inside could watch her building, her route to work, the school pickup line where she collected Emma each afternoon at 3:15. She never saw Marco himself. Did not know what he looked like, could not have picked him out of a lineup, could only trust that he was there, that he was watching, that someone gave a damn if she lived or died beyond the cold mathematics of insurance policies and employee replacement costs. The office settled into a new rhythm, or perhaps she simply learned the old rhythm better, understood it more deeply, saw it more clearly now that she knew what she was looking at. Dante was careful with her. More careful than he had been before their conversation, more considerate than employers needed to be with employees who were ultimately replaceable, ultimately expendable, ultimately just names on a payroll that could be changed with a few keystrokes and a severance check. He asked about Emma. Not intrusively, not with the creeping familiarity that would have set off alarms, but with the polite interest of someone who understood that children were important, that being a single mother was hard, that juggling work and parenting was a high-wire act performed without a net. When Emma had a school play, he let Claire leave early without docking her pay. When she needed to take her daughter to a doctor's appointment, he rearranged meetings to accommodate her schedule. Small things. Considerate things. Things that should not have felt like miracles, but did because her previous jobs had treated motherhood like a character flaw, a weakness to be exploited, a vulnerability that justified paying her less and expecting her to be grateful for the privilege of employment. She began to relax, not completely, never completely, but enough that she stopped checking the parking garage before getting out of her car, enough that she slept through the night occasionally, waking only to Emma's bad dreams instead of her own. Enough that she started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work, this fragile piece she had found in the last place she ever expected to find it. And then she found the ledger. It was not hidden. That was what made it worse somehow, what made it feel more damning, more deliberate, more impossible to ignore or explain away. It sat in the archived files, in a box labeled simply 1998 to 2003, stored in the climate-controlled records room where all businesses kept their old tax returns and employment records and documentation of transactions that were too old to matter but too important to destroy. She had been looking for shipping manifests from 2002, trying to establish a baseline for import volumes before the company's major expansion, trying to build a historical model that would help her forecast future growth patterns. Normal accountant work. Boring work. The kind of detail-oriented task that most people found tedious, but she found soothing, found safe, found predictable in ways that her life had never been. The ledger was leather-bound, the kind of book you bought at an expensive stationery store, the kind that said these records matter, these numbers are important, these transactions are the foundation of everything that comes after. The entries were handwritten in ink that had faded to brown over 2 decades, the script neat and careful and unmistakably feminine, the work of someone who took pride in their record-keeping, who understood that numbers told stories if you knew how to read them. She should have put it back, should have closed the box, returned it to the shelf, forgotten she had ever seen it. Should have remembered that curiosity killed more than cats, that some knowledge was dangerous, that there were things in this world you were better off not knowing. But she was an accountant. Reading ledgers was what she did. Understanding what numbers meant was her profession, her skill, her value in the marketplace of labor and capital. And these numbers were wrong. Not wrong in the sense of miscalculated, but wrong in the sense of what they represented, what they documented, what they proved about the business she worked for and the man who ran it. Protection payments. The column header said simply receipts, but the entries told a different story. Santini Bakery, $2,000 monthly. Delgado Auto Body, $1,500 monthly. Chen Import Export, $3,000 monthly. Page after page of businesses paying Russo Logistics for services that were never specified, for deliveries that were never documented, for consulting that left no other paper trail. Loan interest. The second column was even more damning. Names she did not recognize attached to percentages that would make any legitimate bank blush. 30% annual, 40% annual. Numbers that transformed borrowing into slavery, that turned debt into chains, that made escape impossible and repayment a mirage that receded as you approached. And then the third column, the one that made her hands shake as she read it, the one that turned her stomach and made bile rise in her throat. Collections. Amounts paid, amounts outstanding, and next to some names a single word in that same careful feminine script. Resolved. She knew what resolved meant. Had seen enough crime dramas, read enough news stories, lived in Chicago long enough to understand the euphemism, to decode the sanitized language, to recognize death when it was spelled out in faded brown ink next to names of people who had borrowed money they could not repay, who had welched on debts, who had made the mistake of thinking that organized crime was something you could walk away from if you just explained yourself clearly enough, apologized sincerely enough. Promised to do better next time. One name stopped her cold, made her heart freeze in her chest, made the room spin, made reality tilt on its axis until nothing made sense anymore. Detective C. Morrison, paid in full, June 1998. Her father, Christopher Morrison, Chicago PD for 20 years, died in the line of duty when Claire was 12 years old, responding to a robbery in progress, shot by an unknown assailant who was never caught, never identified, never brought to justice despite the full weight of the police department bearing down on the investigation. Paid in full. Her father had not been dirty. She had lived with that certainty for 22 years, had built her entire understanding of who he was on the foundation of his integrity, his service, his sacrifice. He had been a hero. The funeral had proven it. The flag-draped coffin, the 21-gun salute, the chief of police himself delivering the eulogy about a man who had given everything for his city, for his community, for the ideals he believed in. But the ledger said something different. The ledger said he had been on Russo's payroll. The ledger said he had taken money, had looked the other way, had been part of the system he was supposed to be fighting against. Or the ledger said he had refused, had threatened, had been close to bringing the whole organization down, and paid in full meant something else entirely. Meant a debt settled permanently. Meant a problem resolved. Meant a good cop silenced in a way that looked like line of duty, like heroism, like anything but murder. She did not realize she was crying until the tears hit the page, smudging the old ink, leaving marks on history that had been carefully preserved for reasons she was only beginning to understand. Evidence. This was evidence. Not of current crimes, but of old ones, not of ongoing operations, but of the foundation everything else was built on. She should take it to the police. Should photograph every page, should document everything, should bring 22 years of pain and questions and unresolved grief to someone who could actually do something about it, who could investigate, who could bring justice for her father and all the other names in this ledger marked resolved. But she was a single mother working for a man who made problems disappear. She had a daughter who depended on her, who needed her alive and safe and present. She had an ex-husband who still stalked her despite restraining orders and police reports and all the official machinery of law that had failed to protect her over and over and over again. And she had Marco in a gray Honda keeping her safe because Dante Russo had decided she was worth protecting, had extended his shadow over her not because he owed her, but because she had asked him not to use violence, and he had honored that request in his own way, had found a solution that kept her safe without breaking his promise. What would he do if she took this ledger to the authorities? What would happen to her, to Emma, to the fragile peace she had found in this impossible place? What was her father's death worth, measured against her daughter's safety? The question made her sick, made her hate herself, made her understand in that moment how people got compromised, how they became complicit, how they traded their principles for survival one small decision at a time until they looked in the mirror and did not recognize what looked back. She closed the ledger, put it back in the box, returned the box to the shelf, walked out of the records room on legs that did not quite feel like her own, in a body that seemed to belong to someone else, someone who could look at evidence of murder and choose silence, choose safety, choose the coward's way out. Her phone buzzed. Emma's school. Routine notification about early dismissal tomorrow for teacher training. Normal life intruding on the moment when everything had changed, when innocence had died, when she had learned that working for Dante Russo was not just about turning a blind eye to current crimes, but about standing on a foundation built from the bones of people who had stood in the way. She made it to the bathroom before she threw up, made it to a stall before the sobs started, made it through the breakdown with the water running to cover the sound because she had learned long ago how to fall apart quietly, how to suffer in silence, how to keep going when everything inside her was screaming to stop, to run, to escape before the walls closed in, and she became another name in another ledger marked resolved. When she finally emerged, face washed and makeup repaired and mask firmly back in place, she found Alina Martinez waiting by the sinks. Her assistant, her colleague, the young woman who had become something like a friend over the past 4 months despite Claire's best efforts to keep everyone at arm's length, to maintain professional distance, to protect herself from caring too much about people who might disappear if Dante decided they were problems that needed resolving. "You okay?" Alina's dark eyes searched her face with concern that seemed genuine, that felt real, that made Claire want to confess everything and nothing simultaneously. "Just a headache." The lie came easily because lies always did when the truth was too complicated, too dangerous, too likely to get you killed. Alina nodded but did not look convinced. "If you ever need to talk, about anything, I am a good listener." "I appreciate that." Claire managed a smile that probably looked as fake as it felt, just work stress. "You know how it is." "Actually, I do not." Alina's voice dropped, became quieter, more serious, more weighted with meaning Claire could not quite decode. "I think there is a lot about this place you understand better than I do. You have been here longer, seen more, know more." Something in the way she said it made Claire's instincts prickle, made her skin tighten with awareness that this was not just colleague-to-colleague conversation, that Alina was fishing for something, testing for something, looking for a response that would tell her more than the words Claire was actually saying. "I just keep the books. That is all. Numbers and shipping schedules and making sure we do not get audited by the IRS. Pretty boring stuff." "Is it?" Alina held her gaze for a beat too long, then broke eye contact and moved toward the door. "Well, if the boring stuff ever becomes too much, you know where to find me." She left Claire alone in the bathroom, staring at her own reflection in the mirror, wondering what Alina knew, what she suspected, what she was really asking beneath the surface pleasantries and offers of friendship. Wondering if she was the only person in this building trying to pretend everything was normal, or if everyone was playing the same game, all of them walking around with smiles and small talk, while knowing that the foundation beneath their feet was built on violence and corruption and bodies that had been paid in full. The afternoon crawled by with the thickness of honey, each minute stretching into eternity, each task requiring concentration she could not quite muster, each interaction with coworkers feeling like a performance she was giving for an audience she could not see but knew was watching, always watching, evaluating her performance, deciding if she was trustworthy or if she needed to be resolved. Dante called her into his office at 4:30. She had been dreading it since she left the records room, had been building arguments in her head about why she had been down there, what she had been looking for, how she could explain being in files that predated her employment by a decade and a half. But he only wanted to review the quarterly projections, asked her opinion on expanding their Mediterranean shipping routes, discussed the logistics of opening a new warehouse in Milwaukee. Normal business, normal conversation. No indication that he knew where she had been, what she had found, what she now understood about his father's legacy and the empire Dante had inherited along with the expensive suits and the corner office and the ability to make people disappear. She answered his questions, provided her analysis, made recommendations based on market trends and capacity utilization and all the boring accountant things that were her job, her purpose, her value in this organization that was so much more and so much worse than she had allowed herself to believe. And all the while she watched him, really watched him, trying to see past the careful control and the measured words and the professional demeanor to the man underneath, to the truth of who Dante Russo actually was beneath the tailored wool and expensive cologne, and the mask he wore as comfortably as his own skin. Was he his father's son? Had he ordered people resolved the way the old ledger documented? Did he lose sleep over it, or was it just business, just the cost of maintaining power, just the price of empire in a world where empires were built on the backs of people who could not fight back? He looked up from the projections and caught her staring. Something passed across his face, too quick to name, too complex to parse. "You seem distracted today. Everything all right? Fine, just tired. Emma has been having nightmares. It was true. Her daughter woke screaming twice a week, dreams about the daddy who scared mommy, about monsters that looked like Richard, about bad men who hurt people and got away with it because the police could not stop them, because the law was just words on paper, because safety was an illusion that shattered as easily as glass. If you need time off, take it. Family comes first. The irony nearly broke her. Family comes first from a man whose family business had destroyed hers, had taken her father, had left her mother a widow and Claire an orphan in all the ways that mattered, had shaped the entire trajectory of her life through an act of violence documented in fading brown ink in a ledger that would never see the inside of a courtroom. Thank you, I will let you know. She escaped before the tears could start again, before the anger could overwhelm the fear, before she could say something that would get her resolved, get Emma orphaned, get both of them entered into a ledger that someone would find 20 years from now and wonder about the story behind paid in full. Marco was waiting when she left the building at 5:30, the gray Honda falling into position 3 cars back as she drove toward Emma's school, maintaining distance, but staying close enough that she could see him in her rearview mirror, could feel his presence like a guardian angel or a prison guard. She could not decide which. Emma bounced out of after-school care full of stories about art class and playground politics and the injustice of having to eat vegetables with lunch. Normal 6-year-old concerns, normal childhood worries. The kind of innocence Claire would kill to protect, would die to preserve, would compromise every principle she had ever held to keep intact for as long as possible. Would she become complicit in murder to keep Emma safe? Would she let her father's death go unavenged to ensure her daughter's survival? The questions followed her home, through dinner, through homework, through bath time and stories, and tucking Emma into bed with kisses and promises that mommy would keep her safe, always safe, no matter what. And when she finally collapsed into her own bed, exhausted and wrung out and hating herself for choices she had not yet made, but knew she would, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Different number than Marco's, different area code, different everything. The message was short, 3 sentences that changed everything. I know what you found today. I know who you are. We need to talk. Her hands shook as she typed back. Who is this? The response came immediately. Someone who can help you get justice for your father. Someone who has been waiting a long time for the right person to find that ledger. Someone who knows the only way out of this is through. She should delete the message, should block the number, should go to Dante tomorrow and confess everything, throw herself on his mercy, hope that honesty would protect her better than silence. But she did not, because somewhere in the back of her mind, in the part of her that had been 12 years old and crying over her father's flag-draped coffin, while the chief of police lied about how he had died, in the part that had spent 22 years living with unresolved grief and unanswered questions, and the growing certainty that nothing was as it seemed, in that part she knew the truth. She was already complicit, had been since the moment she took this job, since the moment she accepted Dante's protection, since the moment she chose survival over justice and safety over truth. The only question now was whether she would stay complicit, or whether she would find the courage to do what her father had apparently tried to do all those years ago. Risk everything for the truth, and hope that this time, paid in full did not mean a funeral and a folded flag, and a daughter left behind to wonder if her parent had been a hero, or just another victim of a system too broken to save anyone at all. She stared at the phone for a long time, watching the cursor blink in the message field, waiting for her to decide, to commit, to choose a path that would determine not just her future but Emma's, not just her safety but her soul. Finally, she typed 3 words. When and where? The response came so fast they must have been waiting, watching, anticipating her decision. Tomorrow, Millennium Park, noon, come alone. She would not sleep that night. Would lie awake staring at the ceiling while Emma slumbered peacefully in the next room, innocent and safe for now, protected by Mother's determination and a man's promise, and the fragile illusion that safety was possible in a world built on violence. Tomorrow she would go to the park, would meet whoever had sent those messages, would make choices that could not be unmade. Tonight she would lie here and remember her father's face, would wonder if he had lain awake like this before he died, knowing what he was about to do, understanding the risks, accepting the cost. Would wonder if courage ran in families, or if she was about to discover she was her mother's daughter after all, too afraid to fight, too practical to risk everything, too invested in survival to demand justice. Tomorrow would tell. Tomorrow always did. But tonight, in the darkness of her bedroom with her daughter breathing softly in the next room, and Marco somewhere outside keeping watch over threats he could see, but not the ones that lived in ledgers and memories, and the ghosts of dead fathers who had tried to do the right thing and paid for it with everything they had. Tonight she was just Claire Morrison, accountant and single mother and woman who had found a ledger she wished she could forget, but knew she never would. Tomorrow she would become something else, someone braver or more foolish, she could not yet tell. Tomorrow she would learn if paid in full was her father's epitaph or her inheritance. Tomorrow she would discover if Dante Russo's promise that he would never hurt her was truth or just another lie she wanted desperately to believe. Tomorrow. But tonight the darkness pressed in, and the questions multiplied and sleep remained as distant as justice, as elusive as safety, as impossible as going back to the moment before she opened that box and learned that some knowledge, once gained, can never be forgotten no matter how hard you try. The morning came too quickly and not quickly enough, dawn breaking over Chicago with the indifference of a city that had seen too much to be shocked by anything anymore. Claire had not slept, had instead spent the hours between midnight and sunrise watching the ceiling fan turn lazy circles above her bed, counting the rotations like sheep that refused to bring sleep, like prayers that went unanswered, like the days between now and whatever tomorrow would bring. Emma had woken at 6:30, bright and cheerful and blissfully unaware that her mother was about to walk into a meeting that could destroy their lives or save them, could bring justice for a grandfather Emma had never known, or could get them both killed in ways that would look like accidents, like bad luck, like anything but the truth. She made breakfast on autopilot, poured cereal and milk, packed a lunch with a sandwich cut into triangles because that was how Emma liked them, because normal routines mattered when everything else was chaos, because being a good mother meant maintaining the illusion that the world was safe and predictable, and that mommies always knew what to do. "You look tired," Emma observed with the blunt honesty of children who had not yet learned to lie politely. "Did you have bad dreams too?" "Something like that, sweetheart." Claire forced a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "But I am okay now. Are you excited about school today?" Emma launched into a detailed explanation of the science project they were starting, something about volcanoes and baking soda, and the controlled chaos that passed for education in first grade. Claire listened with half her attention, the other half already at Millennium Park, already sitting on a bench waiting for someone who knew too much, who wanted something she might not be able to give, who represented a choice she was not sure she was brave enough to make. Marco followed them to school, the gray Honda maintaining its careful distance, 3 cars back in traffic, close enough to intervene if Richard appeared but far enough to maintain the fiction of privacy, of independence, of a life that belonged to her instead of being managed by men who thought protection and control were the same thing. She kissed Emma goodbye at the school entrance, held her daughter a beat too long, breathed in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence, tried to memorize this moment in case everything went wrong, in case this was the last normal morning they would ever have. I love you, baby. Be good today. I am always good, Mommy. Emma rolled her eyes with the exaggerated patience of a 6-year-old explaining the obvious. You tell me that every day. Because it is true every day. Now go learn about volcanoes. She watched until Emma disappeared into the building, swallowed by the tide of other children in backpacks and light-up sneakers, normal kids with normal lives who did not know that the world was built on foundations of violence and corruption and bodies that had been paid in full. The drive to work felt like driving to an execution, her own or someone else's she could not yet tell. The office greeted her with its usual morning chaos, people getting coffee and comparing notes on yesterday's Cubs game, and complaining about traffic like these were the things that mattered, like sports and weather and commute times were the currency of concern, instead of just the camouflage that normal people used to hide from the truth that civilization was a thin veneer over savagery. Dante was already in his office when she arrived, visible through the glass wall that separated his domain from the bullpen where the lesser employees worked. He looked up as she passed, caught her eye, nodded a greeting that seemed to contain a question she could not quite parse. Did he know where she was going today? Did he have someone watching her the way Marco watched for Richard? Did Dante Russo's protection extend to monitoring her every move, or just the ones that involved immediate physical danger? She set her purse on her desk, logged into her computer, pulled up the shipping schedules that needed updating before noon, before her meeting, before the moment when everything would change or stay exactly the same depending on what happened in a public park with a stranger who claimed to offer justice. Elena arrived at 8:45, coffee in hand, and a smile that seemed more brittle than usual, more forced, more like a mask that was slipping to reveal something underneath that Claire was only beginning to suspect. Morning, Elena set a second coffee on Claire's desk, the one she always brought, the small kindness that had become routine over 4 months of working together. You look like you need this. Rough night. Claire accepted the cup, wrapped her hands around the warmth, used it as an anchor to reality when reality felt like it was dissolving around her. Emma's nightmares are getting worse. Maybe she needs to talk to someone, a professional. Elena's voice was casual, but her eyes were intent, focused, evaluating Claire's response with the attention of someone who was listening for more than words. Kids internalize trauma. It helps to have someone who knows how to process it with them. I have been thinking about that. The lie came easily because some truths were too dangerous to share, because admitting Emma's nightmares were about Richard meant admitting Richard was still a threat, still a presence, still a shadow that fell across their lives despite restraining orders and Marco's protection and all the machinery of safety that was supposed to keep them secure. Her pediatrician recommended someone. I just need to make the appointment. Let me know if you need help with that, childcare during the sessions or whatever. Elena's smile seemed genuine, but Claire could not shake the feeling that this was not just colleague helping colleague, not just friend supporting friend, but something else, something more calculated, something that had an agenda beneath the surface pleasantries. Thank you, I appreciate it. The morning crawled toward noon with the speed of continental drift, each minute stretching into geological time, each task requiring focus she could not quite summon when her mind was already at the park, already hearing whatever truth the mysterious caller would share, already making choices that would determine the rest of her life. At 11:30, she told the receptionist she was taking an early lunch. At 11:40, she was in her car, Marco's Honda falling into position behind her like gravity, like inevitability, like the shadow she could not shake no matter how fast she drove or how desperately she wanted to be free. She parked 3 blocks from Millennium Park, left her phone in the glove compartment because if Dante's people were tracking her, she did not want them to know where she was going, did not want them to hear what was said, did not want to give them ammunition to use against her if this meeting was a trap, if the person who claimed to offer justice was actually offering something much worse. Marco would follow on foot. She knew that. Knew he would maintain visual contact, would position himself close enough to intervene if Richard appeared or if any other threat materialized. But maybe he would be far enough away that he could not hear the conversation, could not report back to Dante what secrets were being shared on a park bench in broad daylight. The park was crowded with lunch-hour traffic, office workers eating sandwiches and tourists taking photos of the bean, and couples holding hands like the world was normal and safe, and nothing bad ever happened to people who were just living their lives. Claire found an empty bench near the fountain, sat down, and tried to look like she belonged here, like this was just a normal lunch break, and not the moment when everything would change. She did not have to wait long. The woman who sat down beside her was younger than Claire had expected, maybe late 20s, dressed in business casual that could have belonged to any of the thousands of young professionals who worked in the loop. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, minimal makeup, the kind of face you would forget 5 minutes after seeing it unless you were trained to remember details, unless your job required you to notice things other people missed. Claire Morrison. The woman did not look at her, kept her eyes forward, watching the fountain like they were strangers sharing a bench by coincidence rather than design. My name is Agent Sarah Chen, FBI. Before you panic, before you run, before you do anything that will get us both killed, I need you to listen very carefully. The world shifted beneath her feet. FBI. The letters rearranged themselves in Claire's mind, transformed from abstract concept to immediate threat, from distant authority to present danger sitting 18 inches away on a park bench in full view of anyone who might be watching. I am leaving. Claire started to stand, but the woman's hand shot out, not grabbing, just touching her arm lightly, a suggestion rather than a command. Your father was working with us when he died. Agent Chen's voice was barely above a whisper, calm and measured and carrying the weight of truth that had been buried for 22 years. He was investigating the Russo organization. He was close to bringing down the entire family, and they killed him for it. The words hit like bullets, each one finding its mark, each one drawing blood from wounds Claire had thought were healed, but had only been bandaged, covered over, hidden beneath scar tissue that was tearing open now to reveal the raw truth underneath. How do I know you are telling the truth? How do I know this is not some kind of trick? Because I am Vincent Chen's daughter. Agent Chen turned to look at her now, and Claire saw it, saw the resemblance to Marco, to the man who sat in a gray Honda keeping her safe on Dante Russo's orders, keeping her protected because that was what he had been paid to do. My father and yours worked together. They were building a case. They were going to testify. And when the Russo family found out, they killed them both, made it look like line of duty for your father. Made it look like an accident for mine, paid in full. That is what the ledger says. That is what it has always said. Marco, the name came out strangled. Marco works for Dante. He is supposed to be protecting me. Marco does not know who I am. He does not know I am FBI. He does not know his father was working with yours. Agent Chen's face was stone, was control, was the mask of someone who had learned to hide pain so deep that it only showed in the cracks, in the moments when the facade slipped and you could see the grief underneath. He thinks his father died in a car accident on the way home from a security job. He thinks the Russo family gave him work out of respect for a former employee. He has no idea that Dante Russo's father ordered the hit that killed Vincent Chen. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Why me? Because you found the ledger. Agent Chen leaned back, stretched her arms along the back of the bench, the picture of casual conversation, of two women chatting on their lunch break about nothing important. Because you work inside Russo Logistics. Because you have access to financial records that we have been trying to get for 5 years. Because you are exactly what we need to finish what our fathers started. You want me to spy for you. Claire's voice was flat, dead, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. You want me to betray the man who has been protecting me from my abusive ex-husband. You want me to risk my life and my daughter's life to get revenge for fathers we barely remember. I want justice. Agent Chen's control cracked, just for a moment, just enough to let real emotion bleed through, raw and painful and 20 years old but still fresh as yesterday's wounds. I want the men who killed our fathers to pay for what they did. I want the organization that has corrupted this city for 3 generations to fall. I want my father's death to mean something more than just a lie I was told when I was 16 years old. And what happens to Emma when I end up in a ledger marked paid in full? What happens to my daughter when I disappear because I got caught spying on a man who makes people disappear for a living? Witness protection, new identities, new lives. Agent Chen pulled a business card from her pocket, held it out between 2 fingers like a peace offering, like a lifeline, like a trap disguised as salvation. We protect witnesses. It is what we do. You help us build the case, you testify, and we make sure you and Emma are safe. Forever. No more Richard. No more looking over your shoulder. No more wondering if today is the day it all catches up to you. Claire did not take the card. Did not move. Did not breathe. Just sat there on a park bench in Millennium Park while the world continued around her, oblivious and uncaring, while tourists took photos and office workers ate lunch, and somewhere in the distance, a musician played saxophone for tips, playing jazz standards that sounded like freedom if you did not listen too carefully to the notes underneath. How do I know you will keep me safe? How do I know this is not just another man promising protection while planning betrayal? You do not. Agent Chen's honesty was brutal, was refreshing, was terrifying. You cannot know. You can only decide if living with the truth is worth the risk of dying for it. You can only choose whether your father's death gets justice or gets buried with you when you eventually end up in whatever ledger Dante Russo is keeping in whatever secure location he has replaced the old one with. And Richard? Claire asked the question she had been avoiding, the question that cut through all the philosophical debate about justice and consequences and focused on the immediate, the concrete, the threat that had driven her to the FBI in the first place. Did you arrange for him to contact your people? Did you orchestrate this whole thing to make me more dependent on your protection? No. Agent Chen's answer was immediate, was emphatic, was delivered with force that suggested either genuine outrage or masterful performance. Richard reached out on his own. One of Russo's mid-level managers took the meeting without authorization. When Dante found out, he shut it down, had the manager reassigned. Marco has been watching Richard more carefully. The protection is real, Claire, but it comes with strings. It always does with men like Dante Russo. How do I know that is true? You do not. Agent Chen stood, smoothed her skirt, became just another office worker heading back to work after lunch. You have 72 hours to decide. After that, we move forward with or without you. There are other accountants at Russo Logistics. There are other ways to build a case, but none of them have your access, your position, or your father's blood on Dante Russo's hands. You are our best shot at justice. Do not waste it. She walked away before Claire could respond, disappeared into the crowd of lunch-hour pedestrians, became anonymous and invisible and gone, leaving Claire alone on the bench with a business card she had not taken and a choice she did not want to make. Marco appeared 60 seconds later, sitting down in the same spot Agent Chen had vacated, his bulk making the bench creak, his presence both comforting and threatening in equal measure now that she knew who he was, who his father had been. What connection bound them together through death and lies, and the carefully maintained fiction that some people died by accident instead of by design? Everything okay, Miss Morrison? His voice was gravelly, concerned, exactly the tone of a man whose job was protection, whose purpose was safety, whose entire reason for being in her life was making sure no harm came to the woman Dante Russo had decided to shield from the world. Fine, just needed some air. Lunch hour crowds wear me down sometimes. I saw you talking to someone. Marco's eyes scanned the crowd, professional and thorough and missing nothing. The trained awareness of a man who had spent years in security work, who understood that threats could come from anywhere, could look like anyone, could hide behind friendly faces and casual conversations. Friend of yours. Just someone asking for directions. Tourist looking for the art museum. The lie came too easily. That was the problem with lying. Each one made the next one simpler, made dishonesty feel normal, made truth seem like the harder choice when it should have been the default, the baseline, the foundation everything else was built on. But her foundation was cracked now, was broken, was revealed to be constructed on sand and deception, and the comfortable blindness that let her work for a criminal while telling herself she was just an accountant, just doing her job, just surviving in a world that did not care about her scruples or her principles or her father's unavenged death. We should get you back to the office. Marco stood, offered his hand to help her up, the gesture courteous and automatic and completely unnecessary for a woman who was perfectly capable of standing on her own, but accepted it anyway because refusing small kindnesses made people notice, made them wonder, made them suspicious of changes in routine. She let him help her up, let him walk her back to her car, let him resume his position 3 cars back as she drove toward Russo Logistics, toward the office where Dante waited, toward the life she had built on foundations that were dissolving beneath her feet with every passing moment. Elena was waiting at her desk when she returned, perched on the edge of Claire's chair like she belonged there, like she had been invited, like they were close enough that personal space was negotiable. How was lunch? The question was casual, but Elena's eyes were sharp, were focused, were reading Claire's face the way Claire read ledgers, looking for discrepancies, for things that did not add up, for truth hiding beneath the surface of acceptable lies. Fine, just walked around the park for a while, needed to clear my head. Must be a lot on your mind. Elena did not move from the chair, did not give Claire space to sit, to settle, to hide behind the computer screen and the work that needed doing, with Emma's nightmares and Richard and everything. Everything. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning that neither of them acknowledged but both of them understood. Everything that could not be discussed in an office where walls had ears and loyalty was currency, and trust was a commodity you could not afford to give away freely. Actually, there is something I wanted to talk to you about. Elena's voice dropped, became quieter, more serious, more urgent in ways that made Claire's pulse quicken with fear or anticipation or some toxic combination of both. Not here, not now, but soon. It is important. What is it about? Truth. Elena met her eyes, held her gaze, let the words settle between them like a bomb waiting to detonate. About who we really are and what we are really doing here. She slid off the chair before Claire could respond, walked back to her own desk, left Claire standing there with her purse still on her shoulder, and her mind racing through possibilities, through implications, through the dawning realization that maybe Agent Chen was not the only person in her life keeping secrets, maintaining covers, playing roles in a game whose rules Claire was only beginning to understand. The afternoon passed in a blur of spreadsheets and phone calls, and the mechanical routine of work that required no thought, no engagement, no presence beyond the physical necessity of sitting at a desk and moving numbers from one column to another. Claire's mind was at the park, was in the ledger, was 22 years in the past watching her father's funeral and wondering if the tears she had cried were for a hero or a victim, for a man who had died fighting corruption or a cop who had been dirty and paid the price. Agent Chen said he was working with the FBI, said he was building a case, said he was murdered for getting too close to the truth. But how did Claire know that was true? How did she know this was not just another manipulation, another lie wrapped in the appearance of truth, another trap designed to catch people who were stupid enough to believe that justice existed, that right won over might, that doing the good thing did not just get you killed faster? Dante called her into his office at 4. She had been expecting it, had been dreading it, had been preparing for the moment when he would ask about lunch, about the woman on the bench, about whatever Marco had reported back about tourist asking for directions who was probably not a tourist at all. But he only wanted to discuss the Milwaukee expansion. Showed her architectural plans for the new warehouse, asked her opinion on financing options, treated her like a valued colleague whose judgment mattered, whose input was sought, whose presence in his organization was about more than just keeping books and looking the other way when the numbers did not quite add up to legitimate business. "What do you think?" He spread the plans across his desk, pointing to loading docks and office space, and all the infrastructure of a growing company that was trying to go straight, trying to transition, trying to build something legitimate on foundations that were anything but. "It is a solid investment, if the expansion works the way you are projecting." Claire studied the numbers, the projections, the careful financial planning that went into building an empire that was legal instead of criminal, that was taxed instead of hidden, that was documented instead of buried in ledgers marked paid in full. The financing terms are fair. The location has good transport links. The market analysis supports the growth projections. But nothing. It is a good plan. If you are really committed to going legitimate, this is how you do it. Slowly, methodically, building the legal business until it is profitable enough to sustain everything without needing the illegal income. "I am committed." Dante's voice was firm, was certain, was the voice of a man who had made up his mind and would not be swayed. "My father built this empire on blood and fear. I am trying to rebuild it on commerce and trust. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes people willing to believe that change is possible." Is it? The question escaped before she could stop it, before she could remember that challenging Dante Russo was dangerous, was foolish, was the kind of thing that got accountants marked as resolved. Is change really possible, or are you just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic? He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face for something she could not name, could not provide, could not fake even if she wanted to. "What happened today, Claire? You have been different since lunch. Distracted, distant. Did something happen?" The truth sat on her tongue, heavy and dangerous and desperate to be spoken. "Someone from the FBI approached me. Told me my father was investigating your family when he died. Told me you could give me justice if I helped them build a case against you. Told me I have 72 hours to decide if I am going to betray you or become complicit in covering up my father's murder." But she swallowed it down, pushed it back, chose safety over honesty because honesty was a luxury she could not afford when Emma's life depended on making the right choice, and she still did not know what the right choice was. Just tired, Emma's nightmares, work stress, the usual. If you need time off, take it. If you need help, ask for it. Dante's concern seemed genuine, but Claire could not trust it, could not accept it, could not let herself believe that a man whose father had killed hers actually cared about her well-being beyond her utility as an employee who kept his books and asked few questions. "I am fine, just need to get through this week." She left his office before he could press further, before her control could crack, before she could break down and confess everything and discover whether Dante Russo was a man who kept his promises or just another criminal who used protection as a leash, who offered safety as a cage, who gave you choices, and then made sure you chose the option that served him best. The drive home was mechanical, automatic, the route so familiar she could have driven it blind. Marco followed, always following, always watching, always there like a shadow that protected and imprisoned in equal measure. Emma was waiting at after-school care, full of stories about the volcano experiment and how the baking soda had exploded everywhere, and her teacher said it was the best eruption in the whole class. Claire listened and smiled and made appropriate sounds of approval while her mind calculated odds and risks, and the probability that making a deal with the FBI would keep Emma safe versus getting them both killed. Dinner was chicken nuggets and broccoli that Emma picked at while talking about her day, about her friends, about the upcoming field trip to the aquarium that required a permission slip and $20, and a parent volunteer which Claire could not be because she would be at work, would be maintaining the fiction that she was just an accountant, just an employee, just a woman trying to survive. Bath time, stories, tucking Emma into bed with kisses and promises that tomorrow would be better, easier, safer, all the lies that mothers told their children, because the truth was too heavy for small shoulders, too dark for innocent minds, too complicated for anyone who still believed the world was fundamentally good. The knock came at 9 p.m., sharp and professional. The kind of knock that said police or FBI or someone official who expected to be answered, who would not go away until the door opened and questions were asked, and lies were told or truths were confessed depending on who was asking and what they wanted to hear. Claire checked the peephole, expecting Agent Chen or maybe even Dante himself, but found Alina instead, standing in the hallway of her building looking nervous and determined, and nothing like the friendly colleague who brought coffee and made small talk about the Cubs. She opened the door. "We need to talk." Alina pushed past her without waiting for invitation, without asking permission, into the small apartment that was supposed to be Claire's safe space, her refuge, her one place in the world where work did not intrude and Dante Russo's empire did not reach. Now. About what? Claire closed the door, locked it, turned to find Alina standing in her living room looking at the family photos on the walls, the pictures of Emma at various ages, the shrine to normal life that Claire maintained because normal was important, normal was safe, normal was the lie that let her sleep at night. About the fact that I am FBI. Alina turned to face her, and the mask was gone, the friendly colleague replaced by someone harder, sharper, more dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical threat, and everything to do with the power to destroy lives with testimony and warrants, and the full weight of federal law enforcement. About the fact that I have been undercover at Russo Logistics for 8 months. About the fact that Agent Sarah Chen is my partner, and she told me about your meeting today. About the fact that you have a choice to make, and you are running out of time to make it. The room spun. The air left her lungs. Alina. Friendly Alina who brought coffee and asked about Emma and offered to help with childcare during therapy appointments. Alina who had been watching her for 8 months, had been reporting on her, had been building a case while pretending to be a friend. You lied to me. I am doing my job. Alina's voice held no apology, no regret, no acknowledgement that betrayal and duty could be different things wearing the same face. I am trying to take down an organization that has killed hundreds of people over 3 generations. I am trying to get justice for my partner's father and yours. I am trying to stop Dante Russo from perpetuating a criminal empire, no matter how many times he claims he wants to go legitimate. He is going legitimate. The defense came automatically, came desperately, came from the part of Claire that needed to believe some people could change, some men could be better, some promises could be kept even when everything else was lies. The Milwaukee warehouse is real. The transition plan is real. He is trying. The Milwaukee warehouse is a perfect front for smuggling. Alina pulled a folder from her bag, dropped it on Claire's coffee table like evidence, like proof, like truth that could not be argued with. The transition plan is stalling while he maintains criminal operations. The consulting fees you see in the books are protection rackets and loan sharking and all the same crimes his father committed. He just has better accountants hiding it now. Better people like you who want to believe the lie, because the truth is too ugly to accept. Claire did not open the folder, did not want to see what was inside, did not want confirmation that her hope was delusion, that her trust was misplaced, that Dante Russo was exactly what Agent Chen said he was, and nothing like the man who had promised he would never hurt her. What do you want from me? Everything. Alina sat down on the couch in Claire's space in her home, making herself comfortable like this was an interrogation room, and she had all night to break down resistance, to extract confession, to get what she came for. Financial records, meeting schedules, client lists, everything you can access, everything that will help us build a RICO case that puts Dante Russo in prison for the rest of his life. And if I say no? Then we find another way. We use other sources. We build the case slower. Alina leaned forward, her eyes intense. But your father dies unavenged. The man who ordered his death gets away with it. And you spend the rest of your life working for the organization that killed him, taking blood money, becoming complicit in every crime they commit from this day forward. That is not fair. Fair, Alina's laugh was bitter. Was it fair when your father was shot in an alley and left to die? Was it fair when my partner's father was run off the road and his death was ruled an accident? Was it fair when Richard beat you and the police did nothing because the system is broken and men like Dante Russo break it further every day they operate with impunity? Richard, the name caught Claire's attention, pulled her focus back from abstractions about justice and revenge to concrete reality of the man who still stalked her, who still violated restraining orders, who still threatened Emma's safety despite Marco's protection and police reports, and all the official machinery that was supposed to keep her safe. What about Richard? Witness protection covers abusive exes. Alina's voice softened fractionally. You testify, you cooperate, and we relocate you somewhere Richard will never find you. New city, new identity, new life. Emma grows up safe. You get to sleep without wondering if tonight is the night he breaks down your door. At what cost? At the cost of betraying a man who has protected me when the police would not. At the cost of destroying the only stable job I have had in 2 years. At the cost of my integrity because lying and spying is somehow more moral than bookkeeping for criminals. At the cost of doing the right thing even when it is hard. Alina stood, moved to the door. You have until Friday night. After that, we move forward. With you or without you. Your choice, Claire, justice or comfort, truth or safety, your father's legacy or Dante Russo's protection. She left, closing the door quietly behind her, leaving Claire alone in her apartment with a folder she had not opened, and a choice she did not want to make, and the growing certainty that there was no right answer, no safe path, no way forward that did not cost her something she could not afford to lose. She looked in on Emma, sleeping peacefully in the small bedroom decorated with unicorns and rainbows, and all the symbols of childhood innocence that Claire was fighting to preserve. Her daughter's face was relaxed in sleep, unmarked by fear or worry or the knowledge that the world was cruel and dangerous, and that mothers could not always protect their children no matter how hard they tried. I am sorry, baby. The whisper was barely audible even to herself. I am so sorry you got a mother who could not keep you safe without making deals with devils, without choosing between bad and worse, without becoming someone I swore I would never be. She returned to the living room, sat on the couch, opened the folder Alina had left. Inside were surveillance photos, financial records, transcripts of wiretapped conversations, evidence of ongoing criminal activity at Russo Logistics, proof that Dante's transition to legitimate business was a fiction, a delay tactic, a way to maintain operations while appearing to reform. And in the back, a photograph that made her blood freeze. Richard meeting with a man she recognized from the office. One of Dante's associates. Money changing hands. A handshake that looked like agreement, like conspiracy, like a deal that connected her abusive ex-husband to the criminal organization she worked for in ways she had never imagined, had never suspected, had never wanted to believe. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Not Agent Chen's, not Alina's, not anyone she knew. She answered anyway because at this point, what did she have to lose that was not already at risk, already compromised, already circling the drain of her life that was spinning out of control faster than she could bail water? Claire Morrison. The voice was male, older, carrying authority that came from decades of command. This is Special Agent Marcus Delacroix, FBI. I am Agent Chen's supervising officer. I understand you have been approached about cooperating with our investigation. I have not decided anything yet. I am not calling to pressure you. His voice was surprisingly gentle. I am calling to tell you that your ex-husband Richard has been making inquiries about Emma's school schedule. He has been in contact with associates of the Russo organization. We believe he is planning something that will put your daughter in immediate danger. Everything stopped. Time stopped. Breathing stopped. What kind of danger? We are not certain. But Claire, you need to understand something. Men like Dante Russo do not just protect people. They own people. They create situations where you need them, where you cannot survive without them, where leaving becomes impossible because they hold all the power. Richard's contact with Russo associates might not be coincidence. It could be design. You are saying Dante arranged this. Arranged for Richard to threaten Emma, so I would be more dependent on his protection. I am saying it is a possibility you need to consider. Agent Delacroix's voice remained calm, factual, laying out evidence without editorializing, without pushing, letting the implications speak for themselves. I am saying that 72 hours is not much time to decide if you trust the man paying your salary or the badge that represents law enforcement. But I am also saying that if Richard moves on Emma, we may not be able to stop it in time. Marco works for Russo. His loyalty is to his employer, not to you. What do you want me to do? I want you to bring Emma somewhere safe. Tonight, we have a field office that can provide temporary protective custody while you decide if you are willing to cooperate fully. No commitment, no obligation, just safety for your daughter while you make the most important decision of your life. And if I refuse, then we will do our best to monitor the situation. But I cannot guarantee your daughter's safety if Richard acts and Marco's instructions from Dante are to let it happen. To let you be scared enough that you never think about leaving, about testifying, about doing anything except being grateful for protection that may or may not be real. Claire looked at the surveillance photo again. Richard shaking hands with a Russo associate. Money on the table between them. A deal that put Emma at risk, that put everything at risk, that made trust impossible and safety a lie. I need an hour to pack. To think, to figure out how to tell my 6-year-old that we are going into hiding because Mommy's boss might be using her as bait to keep Mommy compliant. You have an hour. Agent Delacroix gave her an address on the south side, a field office that was secure, that was protected. That was the first step toward witness protection or toward a life on the run depending on whether she chose to cooperate or just chose to disappear. We will be waiting. And Claire, you are doing the right thing. Your father would be proud. He hung up before she could respond, before she could argue, before she could say that she was not doing the right thing. She was doing the only thing. She was choosing her daughter's safety over everything else the way mothers had been doing since the beginning of time, since the first woman held the first child and knew that protecting that life meant sacrificing her own if necessary. She packed quickly, mechanically, throwing clothes and Emma's favorite stuffed animals into a bag, gathering medications and school records, and all the ephemera of a life that was about to be abandoned, about to be left behind, about to become someone else's problem. Emma woke when Claire lifted her from bed, confused and sleepy, and asking why they were leaving in the middle of the night like, this was an adventure instead of an escape. "We are going somewhere safe, baby. Mommy will explain everything in the morning. Right now, I just need you to trust me." "I always trust you, Mommy." Emma's voice was thick with sleep, with innocence, with faith that her mother would keep her safe no matter what, no matter the cost, no matter how many lies it required or how many deals had to be made with how many different devils. The gray Honda was parked across the street when they left the building. Marco behind the wheel, visible in the glow of the streetlight, watching, always watching. Claire's heart hammered as she loaded Emma into the car, as she pulled out of the parking space, as she began driving toward the south side. Marco followed for 3 blocks, 4 blocks, 5. Then his phone rang. Claire saw the glow of the screen illuminate his face in the rearview mirror, saw him answer, saw his expression change from alert to confused to something that might have been understanding or might have been disappointment. His car turned down a side street, disappeared, vanished into the night like he had never been there. Claire understood immediately. Dante had called him off, had given the order to stand down, to let her go, to allow her this choice even knowing what it meant, even understanding that her flight was the first step toward his destruction. Either that or it was a test. Let her run to the FBI, see what she does, use her cooperation to identify other informants, other weaknesses, other threats to the organization. She would never know which, would never be certain if Dante's final act of protection was genuine or just one more manipulation in a life defined by men who claimed to care while controlling every aspect of her existence. She drove faster, checked the mirrors obsessively, held her breath until she pulled into the parking lot of the FBI field office, until she saw Agent Chen waiting by the entrance, until she knew that at least for tonight, at least for now, Emma was safe. The choice could wait until morning. The decision could wait until she had slept, had thought, had figured out if cooperating with the FBI was justice or revenge, if testifying against Dante was courage or betrayal, if destroying the man who had protected her was the right thing to do or just the easier thing, the thing that let her sleep at night without wondering if her father would be proud or ashamed of the daughter who valued survival over integrity, who chose safety over truth. Who picked the devil she did not know over the devil who had at least been honest about what he was. But as she carried sleeping Emma into the building, as Agent Chen held the door and nodded grimly and said welcome to the first day of the rest of your life, Claire knew that morning would come too soon and not soon enough, that decisions delayed were just choices made by default, that running away was its own kind of answer. And that somewhere in Chicago, Dante Russo was learning that his accountant had fled in the night, was getting reports about FBI field offices and protective custody, was making his own decisions about what came next, about what Claire Morrison's flight meant, about whether protection could be revoked as easily as it was given. The game had changed. The players were revealed. The stakes were clear. Now came the part where everyone discovered what they were really willing to sacrifice for victory, for justice, for the future they believed in, even if that future was built on the ashes of everything they had destroyed to get there. Now came the reckoning, and no one would walk away clean. The FBI field office smelled like coffee and fluorescent lights, and the particular staleness of government buildings, where windows never opened and air circulated through systems designed decades ago by people who never had to work in the spaces they created. Claire sat in a conference room that was trying to be comfortable, but failed in the way that all institutional spaces failed, with chairs that were too hard and lighting that was too bright, and the constant underlying hum of machinery keeping everything climate-controlled and monitored and secure. Emma slept in the next room, curled on a couch that converted to a bed, watched over by a female agent whose job was protection, but whose presence felt like surveillance, like containment, like the first step in a process that would either save them or destroy them depending on choices Claire had not yet made, decisions she was running out of time to avoid. It was 3 a.m, the dead hour when the body knows it should be sleeping, but the mind refuses to quiet, when exhaustion and adrenaline mix into a toxic cocktail that makes everything seem both urgent and impossible, when clarity becomes elusive and doubt becomes certainty, and the only thing you know for sure is that sunrise will come whether you are ready for it or not. Agent Chen sat across from her, looking fresher than anyone had a right to look at 3 a.m., her dark eyes alert and focused in ways that suggested she had trained for this, had done this before, had learned how to function on no sleep and high stakes, and the weight of other people's lives hanging on her ability to extract cooperation from witnesses who did not want to be witnesses, who wanted to go back to their normal lives and pretend none of this had ever happened. I know this is hard. Agent Chen's voice was gentle but firm, the tone of someone who understood trauma but would not let it derail the mission, who had empathy but kept it leashed in service of the greater good. I know you feel like you are betraying someone who helped you, but Claire, you need to understand what Dante Russo really is. She slid a folder across the table, different from the one Alina had left, thicker, more evidence, more proof, more truth that Claire did not want to see but could not look away from. Inside were files on 14 people, 14 names, 14 lives that had intersected with the Russo organization and ended badly. Not resolved like the ledger said, but detailed, documented, autopsied, investigated, and ultimately filed away as unsolved because witnesses disappeared and evidence vanished, and the machinery of justice ground to a halt when it came up against the machinery of organized crime. A lone shark victim who had jumped from a bridge. Except the autopsy showed bruises inconsistent with a fall, showed a blood alcohol level that suggested drugging, showed signs that suggested this was not suicide, but homicide staged to look like desperation. A business owner whose store burned down 2 weeks after refusing to pay protection money. Arson investigators found accelerant patterns that indicated professional work, found timing devices that were military grade, found nothing that could be traced back to anyone, because the people who did this work were ghosts, were specialists, were insulated from prosecution by layers of deniability and fear. A police officer who had testified against a Russo associate. Car accident on a clear day, single vehicle, no witnesses, brake lines cut so cleanly, it was almost missed in the initial investigation, discovered only when the family demanded a second autopsy, buried in a report that went nowhere because who investigates the mob when the mob owns enough of the department to make investigation career suicide? Page after page, life after life, people who had crossed the Russo family or failed to pay debts or made the mistake of thinking they could walk away or simply knew too much and became liabilities that needed to be managed. And at the bottom of the stack, her father, Claire Morrison. The full file this time, not just the sanitized version she had been told, not just the heroic narrative that had sustained her through childhood and adolescence and into adulthood. The real story, the investigation he had been conducting, the wire he had worn, the testimony he was preparing to give, the threat he posed to an organization that had operated with impunity for 3 generations. The murder they had staged to look like line of duty. The bullet that came from a gun that was later connected to 5 other unsolved killings. The cover-up that had been executed so smoothly that even the police department never questioned the official story, never dug deeper, never wondered if one of their own had been sacrificed not to crime, but to the very criminals he was sworn to fight. Your father died trying to stop this. Agent Chen's finger tapped the folder. Vincent Chen died trying to stop this. 14 other people, probably more we have not connected yet, died because the Russo family operates like this is their city, like laws do not apply to them, like human life is just another commodity to be managed and disposed of when it becomes inconvenient. Dante is not his father. The words came out weaker than Claire intended, hollower, less convincing even to her own ears. He is trying to transition to legitimate business. He told me. I have seen the plans. Plans mean nothing without action. Agent Chen pulled out another folder, this one showing financial transactions from the last 6 months, showing the continued flow of money from protection rackets and loan sharking and all the traditional Russo family businesses. The legitimate expansion is real. The warehouse in Milwaukee is real, but it is not a replacement. It is an addition. Dante is not dismantling the criminal empire. He is supplementing it with legal income that provides cover. That makes the books look cleaner. That lets him tell people like you that he is going straight while continuing to profit from everything his father built on blood and extortion. How do I know you are telling the truth? How do I know this is not just the FBI building a case with circumstantial evidence and asking me to betray someone based on suspicion rather than proof? Because we have been building this case for 5 years. Agent Chen's voice hardened, lost its gentle edge, became the voice of someone who had dedicated years to this hunt, who had sacrificed her own life to the pursuit of justice for a father she barely remembered. Because I have been undercover in that world, adjacent to it, investigating it, documenting it, watching people die while lawyers and judges and cops who should know better look the other way because the Russo family has money and power and connections that go all the way up the chain. Because Alina has been inside Russo logistics risking her life every single day to gather evidence that will actually hold up in court. Because your cooperation is not the whole case, Claire. It is the final piece. The insider testimony that makes everything else admissible, that provides context, that turns a circumstantial case into a prosecution that will put Dante Russo in prison for the rest of his life. And what happens to Marco? To the drivers and warehouse workers who are just trying to make a living? To the people who depend on Russo logistics for their income and do not know anything about the criminal side? We are not interested in low-level employees. Agent Chen softened again, became almost sympathetic. We want the organization. We want the people making the decisions, ordering the violence, profiting from the crime. Marco will be given the option to cooperate. So will anyone else who can provide valuable testimony. The goal is not to destroy lives. It is to dismantle a criminal enterprise that has destroyed too many lives already. The door opened. Agent Marcus Delacroix entered, older than Claire had pictured from their phone conversation, maybe 65 with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades in law enforcement, who had seen enough to be cynical, but somehow retained enough idealism to keep fighting, kept pursuing justice in a world that often seemed designed to prevent it. Miss Morrison. He sat down heavily, like his bones ached, like the hour was taking its toll on him too. I appreciate you coming here tonight. I know this is not easy. You said Richard is planning something. Claire's voice was steady, was controlled, was the voice of a mother whose first priority was always her daughter's safety regardless of what it cost her personally. You said Emma is in danger. We believe so. Agent Delacroix opened his own folder, this one containing surveillance photos of Richard meeting with a man Claire recognized from Russo Logistics, a mid-level manager whose job title was operations coordinator, but whose actual function was harder to define, was deliberately vague, was the kind of position that existed in organizations where not all operations were legal. These photos were taken 4 days ago. 3 days ago, Richard made inquiries at Emma's school about pickup procedures, about who was authorized to collect her, about security protocols. Yesterday, he was seen surveilling your apartment building at the time Emma would normally arrive home from aftercare. Why would Dante's people be helping Richard? It does not make sense. Dante has been protecting me from Richard. Why would he facilitate contact with him? Control. Agent Delacroix's answer was immediate, was certain, was delivered with the flat affect of someone stating obvious truth. You make yourself indispensable by creating the threat and then protecting against it. You ensure loyalty by making someone dependent on your protection. It is an old tactic. Effective. We have seen it before with the Russo family. They identify vulnerable people, people with problems they can solve, and they solve those problems while creating new ones that keep you coming back, keep you grateful, keep you compliant. You think Dante arranged for Richard to threaten Emma so I would need him more. Claire's stomach turned, bile rising in her throat, the betrayal cutting deeper than she thought possible. You think this whole thing has been manipulation. We think it is a possibility you need to consider seriously. Agent Delacroix's voice remained gentle, remained factual, presented the evidence without editorializing, without pushing, letting the implications speak for themselves in ways that were more damning than any accusation could be. We think Marco's protection is real but conditional. We think the moment you stop being useful, the moment you become a liability, that protection evaporates. We think Richard's sudden escalation in behavior, his willingness to risk violating a restraining order so blatantly, his connection to Russo associates, all of it points to coordination rather than coincidence. Or it could just be Richard being Richard, violent, obsessive, incapable of letting go. And maybe he reached out to people he thought could help him get to me. Maybe there is no conspiracy. Maybe I am just caught between an abusive ex and a boss who is trying to go legitimate, and an FBI that needs a win so badly it will tell me anything to get my cooperation. That is possible. Agent Delacroix nodded, acknowledging the point without conceding it. Which is why we are not asking you to make a decision right now. We are asking you to stay here, in protective custody, where Emma is safe, and you have time to think clearly without the immediate pressure of Richard's threats or Dante's presence. We are asking you to look at the evidence with fresh eyes. And we are asking you to consider what your father would want you to do. The invocation of her father hit hard, triggered emotion rather than reason, felt like manipulation wrapped in the language of legacy and honor, and doing the right thing. Do not use my father to manipulate me. Claire's voice came out sharp, edged with anger that had been building since she opened that ledger, since she learned the truth about how he died, since she understood that the heroic narrative she had been told was both true and false, that he had been brave and it had gotten him killed, that courage was no match for corruption when corruption had guns and money, and the will to use both. Do not pretend you know what he would want when he has been dead for 22 years, and I have had to live with that loss every single day while you built your case and waited for the right moment to use his death as leverage. Agent Delacroix had the grace to look chastened, to nod acceptance of the rebuke, to let the moment sit in silence before responding. You are right. I apologize. I did not know your father. I only know what the case files say. What I can tell you is that he died trying to stop an organization that is still operating, still hurting people, still corrupting everything it touches. Whether you help us finish what he started, that is your decision. But it is a decision you need to make with full knowledge of what is at stake, not just for you and Emma. For everyone, the Russo family will hurt in the future if they are allowed to continue. The weight of it pressed down on Claire like atmosphere, like the accumulated mass of all the choices that had led her to this moment, sitting in an FBI conference room at 3 a.m, while her daughter slept, and the clock ticked toward a decision that would define the rest of their lives. I need to see him. The words came out before she had fully formed the thought, before she had processed what she was asking, what it meant, what it would cost. I need to talk to Dante. Hear his side. Make my own judgment about whether he is what you say he is or whether he is what he seems to be. That is not advisable. Agent Chen's response was immediate, was firm, was the voice of someone who saw the request as a threat to the investigation, to the case they had built, to the momentum they needed to maintain. If Dante knows you are here, if he knows you are considering cooperation, you become a liability. And the Russo family has a very efficient way of dealing with liabilities. I am not asking permission. Claire met her eyes, held her gaze, let the steel in her voice make clear that this was not negotiable, was not optional, was the condition under which she would even consider what they were asking. I am telling you what I need to make an informed decision. You want my cooperation, you arrange a meeting, monitored, recorded, whatever makes you comfortable. But I will not testify against someone without giving them a chance to explain themselves. That is not justice. That is just revenge with a badge. The two agents exchanged looks, silent communication passing between them in the way that partners developed over years of working together, of building cases together, of making judgment calls in real time about what risks were acceptable and which ones were too dangerous to contemplate. Finally, Agent Delacroix nodded. We can arrange it. Neutral location. Full surveillance. But Claire, you need to understand that anything he tells you could be a lie designed to keep you compliant, to maintain his control, to prevent you from testifying. Dante Russo is very good at telling people what they want to hear. Then, I guess, I will have to be very good at hearing what he is not saying. The meeting was arranged for noon. A coffee shop in the Loop, public enough that violence was unlikely, but private enough that conversation was possible. FBI surveillance would be everywhere, cameras and microphones and agents posing as customers, recording everything, documenting everything, building their case whether Claire cooperated or not. Emma stayed at the field office with the female agent, playing with toys they kept on hand for situations like this, for witnesses with children, for people whose lives had been upended by investigations and prosecutions, and the machinery of justice that ground forward regardless of who got caught in its gears. Claire arrived 15 minutes early, ordered coffee she would not drink, sat at a table near the window where she could watch the street, where she could see Dante arrive, where she could maintain the illusion of control in a situation where control was the first thing she had lost. He appeared at exactly noon, punctual as always, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, moving through the coffee shop with the easy confidence of someone who owned every space he entered, who commanded attention without demanding it, who made the room orient around him through sheer force of presence. He sat down across from her, studied her face, did not speak immediately, just looked at her with those dark eyes that had seen too much and revealed too little, that held secrets she would never know and truths she was not sure she wanted to hear. You ran. His voice was soft, was controlled, carried no accusation but held a question that demanded answer. Emma and you, in the middle of the night. Marco reported you went to an FBI field office on the South Side. I did. Claire saw no point in denying it, in pretending this was anything other than what it was. They told me things. About my father. About your father. About the organization and what it really does. And you believed them. Not a question. A statement. An observation delivered without judgment but carrying the weight of disappointment, of trust broken, of understanding that their relationship, whatever it had been, was fundamentally changed by her choice to run, to seek protection from his enemies, to consider testimony that would destroy him. I do not know what I believe. Claire wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, using the warmth to ground herself, to maintain focus when everything in her wanted to run again, to escape this confrontation, to avoid the moment of truth that was coming whether she was ready for it or not. They showed me evidence. Files on people who died after crossing your family. They said you are still running criminal operations while pretending to go legitimate. They said you arranged for Richard to contact your people, so you could control me through fear. And what do you think? Dante's eyes never left hers, never wavered, never broke contact in the way that liars did, in the way that guilty men did when confronted with their crimes. Do you think I would hurt a child to maintain leverage over an accountant? Do you think I would orchestrate threats against Emma to keep you dependent on my protection? I do not know. The honest answer was the only answer she could give. I do not know you well enough to say what you are capable of or not capable of. I know you run a business with connections to organized crime. I know your father killed my father. I know the ledger I found documents decades of violence and extortion and criminal activity. What I do not know is whether you are trying to be different or whether you are just better at hiding it. My father did kill your father. Dante's voice remained steady, remained controlled, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been pain or might have been regret or might have been the practiced expression of someone who knew how to fake emotion when real emotion was dangerous. I did not know about it until recently. I was 14 when Christopher Morrison died. I was not running the organization. I was not making those decisions. I was a kid who worshipped a father who turned out to be a monster. Recently, Claire latched onto the word. When did you find out? 3 months ago, when you were hired. Dante leaned back, the confession seeming to cost him something, seeming to require effort that went beyond the physical act of speaking. I run background checks on all employees. Yours came back with flags I did not understand at first. Daughter of a Chicago police officer killed in the line of duty. Father who had been investigating organized crime. I went through the old files, found the ledger you found, discovered what my father had done. And you hired me anyway. Why? Because you needed a job. Because you were qualified. Dante's voice softened fractionally. Because I thought maybe hiring you was a way to make amends for something I could not change, could not undo, could not apologize for in any meaningful way. Your father died because of my family. The least I could do was give his daughter a chance to rebuild her life. Or you hired me because you knew I would find the ledger eventually, and when I did you would be there to manage my reaction, to control the damage, to make sure I stayed quiet. Claire watched his face, looking for tells, for signs of deception, for anything that would confirm or deny the FBI's theory that everything had been manipulation from the beginning. If I wanted you quiet, you would be quiet. Dante's voice went cold, went hard, became the voice of the man who ran an organization built on violence and fear, and the absolute certainty that power could solve any problem if you were willing to use it. I do not need elaborate schemes to control people, Claire. I have lawyers and money and connections that go all the way to the top of city government. If I wanted to silence you, you would be silenced. If I wanted Emma taken from you, she would be gone. If I wanted you disappeared, you would disappear. The fact that you are sitting here, that you ran to the FBI, that you are free to make choices about your future, that tells you everything you need to know about what I actually want. Which is what? For you to be safe, for Emma to grow up without fear, for you to have a life that is yours instead of defined by men who hurt you or men who claim to protect you while controlling you. Dante leaned forward, his intensity focused like a laser, like truth delivered with force that made it impossible to ignore. I am not a good man, Claire. I have done things I am not proud of. I run an organization that has hurt people, but I am trying to be better than my father. I am trying to transition to legitimate business, not because it is profitable, though it is, but because I am tired of living in a world where violence is the answer to every problem, where loyalty is bought with fear, where the only legacy you leave is blood and ashes and children who either repeat your mistakes or spend their lives running from them. The FBI says you are still running protection rackets, still collecting on loans at illegal interest rates, still maintaining all the criminal operations your father built. I am. Dante did not deny it, did not make excuses, did not try to justify the unjustifiable. Because you cannot dismantle an empire in a day. You cannot walk away from obligations and debts and agreements that go back decades without starting a war that would kill everyone I am trying to protect. The drivers who depend on their paychecks, the warehouse workers who have families, the old soldiers who know nothing except this life and would starve without the income I provide. I am trying to wind it down, to transition people to legitimate work, to build something that does not require violence to sustain it. But that takes time. And in the meantime, I maintain the criminal operations because walking away means those operations get taken over by people who are worse, who are more violent, who do not care about anything except profit and power. So you keep doing evil to prevent greater evil. Claire heard the rationalization, recognized it for what it was, understood how easy it was to justify continuation of the very things you claimed to oppose when the alternative seemed worse. I keep providing for people who depend on me while building an exit strategy that does not get them all killed. Dante's voice carried conviction, carried certainty, carried the weight of someone who had thought through these moral calculations and come to conclusions that let him sleep at night. You can call it evil if you want. You can judge me for not walking away immediately. But I am asking you to consider the consequences of what the FBI is asking you to do. You testify, the organization collapses overnight. Rival families move in to fill the vacuum. The violence that follows will make everything my father did look restrained by comparison. The people who work for me, the legitimate employees who have no idea about the criminal side, they lose their jobs. Their families suffer. And for what? So you can feel like you got justice for a father who died 22 years ago, so the FBI can get a win they can brag about in press conferences. You are asking me to let you continue running a criminal organization because shutting it down would be messy. You are asking me to ignore my father's murder because the alternative is inconvenient for the people who benefit from that organization's existence. I am asking you to think about consequences beyond your personal desire for revenge. Dante's voice hardened again, became steel wrapped in silk, became the voice of someone who commanded and expected obedience. I am asking you to consider whether destroying me actually makes the world better or just satisfies your need to feel like you did something. I am asking you to look at Emma and ask yourself if testifying against me, if helping the FBI dismantle an organization that will be replaced by something worse, if putting yourself and your daughter in witness protection for the rest of your lives is really worth whatever abstract notion of justice you think you are pursuing. The words hung between them, weighted with truth and lies and the impossible complexity of moral choices that had no clear right answer. No path that did not cost someone something they could not afford to lose. And Richard? Claire asked the question she had been avoiding, the question that cut through all the philosophical debate about justice and consequences and focused on the immediate, the concrete, the threat that had driven her to the FBI in the first place. Did you arrange for him to contact your people? Did you orchestrate this whole thing to make me more dependent on your protection? No, Dante's answer was immediate, was emphatic, was delivered with force that suggested either genuine outrage or masterful performance. Richard reached out on his own. One of my mid-level managers took the meeting without my knowledge, without my authorization, because Richard offered money for information about your schedule, about Emma's routine. When I found out, I shut it down. Had the manager reassigned to a position where he would never interact with sensitive information again. Marco has been watching Richard more carefully. I increased your protection not to control you, but to ensure Richard's desperation did not put Emma at risk. How do I know that is true? You do not. Dante stood, straightened his jacket, prepared to leave in the way that powerful men left when they had said what they came to say, and had no more time to waste on persuasion. You have to decide whether you trust the man who has protected you for 4 months or the federal agents who have been lying to you for 8. You have to decide whether you believe I killed your father or my father did. You have to decide whether justice requires destroying everyone connected to a crime, or whether it can be satisfied by ensuring the crime does not continue. Your choice, Claire. But make it knowing that whatever you decide, Emma will live with the consequences for the rest of her life. He walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Claire alone with cold coffee and hot tears, and the certain knowledge that there was no right answer, no choice that would let her sleep peacefully, no path forward that did not require her to betray someone, to compromise something, to lose a piece of herself in the service of survival or justice, or whatever word she chose to describe the impossible decision she was being forced to make. The FBI agents materialized around her like ghosts, like they had been there all along, which of course they had been. Agent Chen sat down in Dante's vacated chair. Agent Delacroix stood nearby, his presence both comforting and confining. Well, Agent Chen's voice was carefully neutral, carefully controlled, carefully designed not to push but nonetheless conveying urgency, necessity, the requirement for commitment. What is your answer? Claire looked at the surveillance photos they had shown her, looked at the evidence of crimes past and present, looked at the file on her father with its detailed account of his investigation, his courage, his decision to stand up to corruption even knowing it would cost him everything. She thought about Emma sleeping at the FBI field office, innocent and safe for now, but facing a future that would be defined by the choice her mother made in this moment. In this coffee shop, in this instant when the weight of history and justice and vengeance and protection all collapsed into a single decision that could not be unmade, could not be taken back, could not be reconsidered once the words were spoken. She thought about Dante's argument, about the complexity of dismantling an organization, about the people who would suffer if the empire collapsed too quickly, about the violence that would follow if nature's vacuum was filled by worse men with fewer scruples and no interest in transition or reform. She thought about her father dying in an alley, about the lies she had been told, about the heroism that was real and the murder that was also real, about justice delayed and justice denied, and the question of whether revenge counted as justice when it was personal, when it was motivated not by principle but by pain. I will testify. The words came out quiet, came out certain, came out with the finality of someone who had wrestled with impossible choices and chosen the hard right over the easy wrong even knowing it would cost her everything. I will give you the financial records. I will explain the consulting fees and the shell companies and everything I know about how the organization operates. I will help you build your case. Agent Chen nodded, professional satisfaction evident in her expression, in the slight relaxation of tension that suggested this was the answer she had hoped for, had expected, had worked toward through months of investigation and cultivation and careful manipulation of a woman who was broken enough to be desperate and strong enough to be useful. But Claire held up her hand, forestalling the congratulations, the expressions of gratitude, the immediate transition to logistics and planning and the machinery of prosecution. I have conditions. Emma gets full protection, new identities, new city. Somewhere Richard will never find us and Dante's organization cannot reach us. I want it in writing. I want guarantees that my daughter will be safe not just during the trial, but after, not just for a year, but for her entire life. Because I am not doing this for revenge. I am doing this because my father died trying to stop these people, and his death needs to mean something more than just a tragedy I carry around for 22 years. But I am also a mother, and Emma's safety comes before justice, before my father's memory, before anything and everything else. That is not negotiable. Agreed. Agent Delacroix's response was immediate, suggesting they had anticipated this, had prepared for it, had drawn up the papers before the meeting even happened. Full witness protection, new identities, relocation to a city of your choosing from an approved list, financial support until you can find employment, ongoing security monitoring, everything you need to build a new life. And Marco. Claire surprised herself with the addition, with the concern for a man who might have been complicit in her manipulation, who might have been protecting her or might have been controlling her or might have been doing both simultaneously. He does not know the truth about his father, about Vincent Chen working with my father, about how they both died. You tell him. You give him the choice to cooperate or walk away. But you do not arrest him, without giving him the chance to know who his father really was. That is not standard procedure. Agent Chen's objection was reflexive, was bureaucratic, was the voice of someone who saw complications where Claire saw basic human decency. I do not care about your procedure. Claire's voice hardened, found strength she did not know she possessed, found the core of steel that had let her survive Richard's abuse and Dante's world, and the impossible weight of choices no one should have to make. Marco deserves to know the truth. His father died a hero. He deserves to know that before you ask him to choose sides. That is my condition. Take it or find another accountant to build your case. The agents exchanged looks again. Calculation and assessment, and the rapid evaluation of whether this concession was worth making to secure the cooperation they needed. Fine, Agent Delacroix nodded. We tell Marco the truth. We give him the choice. But Claire, you need to understand that telling him might compromise him, might make him unreliable as protection for Dante, might put him in danger. Then you protect him too. Or you do not. But you do not use his ignorance as a weapon. You do not deny him the truth because it is convenient for your investigation. Information is power. He deserves to have that power before you ask him to make decisions that will affect the rest of his life. Agreed. The word sealed it, sealed her fate, sealed Emma's future, sealed the end of the life she had built and the beginning of something new, something unknown, something that would be defined by running and hiding and the constant awareness that her testimony had made her a target, had made her dangerous to powerful people who eliminated threats as casually as other people eliminated items from grocery lists. When do we start? Claire asked the question that would begin the process, that would start the clock ticking toward testimony and trial, and the public revelation of everything she knew, everything she had learned, everything that would send Dante Russo to prison and dismantle an organization that had survived 3 generations of law enforcement efforts to destroy it. Now, Agent Chen was already pulling out paperwork, already transitioning to logistics, already moving forward with the momentum of an investigation that had been building for 5 years and was finally reaching its conclusion. We debrief you on the financials. You walk us through the records. We build the timeline. We coordinate with the prosecutor's office. We prepare you for testimony. And we keep Emma safe while all of this happens. The next 6 months were a blur of depositions and meetings and rehearsals for trial testimony that felt like preparing for a performance, except the audience was a jury, and the stakes were life and death, and the consequences of getting it wrong included not just acquittal for Dante, but potentially retaliation against her, against Emma, against everyone she had ever cared about. She learned things she had not known, about the scope of the organization, about connections to politicians and judges and police officers who were on the payroll, who looked the other way, who provided information and protection and cover in exchange for money that was never quite traceable back to the Russo family. She learned about the violence, not in abstract terms but in specific cases, in detailed accounts of people who had been beaten and killed and disappeared because they threatened the organization, because they owed money, because they knew too much, because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time and became collateral damage in a war that never ended, that just evolved, that adapted to survive regardless of who got hurt in the process. She learned that Dante had been telling the truth about some things. He was trying to transition to legitimate business. The Milwaukee warehouse was real. The plans for expansion were genuine, but he had also been lying about others. The criminal operations had not decreased. They had just become more carefully hidden, more efficiently managed, more insulated from prosecution through layers of shell companies and intermediaries who could not be directly connected to Russo leadership. Marco learned the truth about his father. Agent Chen told him personally, showed him the evidence, gave him the files that documented Vincent Chen's cooperation with the FBI, his investigation of the Russo family, his murder disguised as accident. Marco's world shattered in ways Claire understood, in ways that created a bond between them built on shared grief, shared betrayal, shared understanding that the people they had loved had died trying to do the right thing, and their deaths had been covered up by lies that lasted decades. Marco chose to cooperate, provided testimony about security protocols, about how protection worked, about the ways the Russo organization insulated itself from prosecution by ensuring that violence was always committed by people who could not be directly linked back to leadership. The trial lasted 8 weeks. The prosecution presented evidence that was overwhelming, was damning, was the accumulated result of 5 years of investigation and decades of crimes that had been documented but never prosecuted, investigated but never solved, known but never proven beyond reasonable doubt. Claire testified for 3 days, walked the jury through the financial records, explained how the shell companies worked, identified the consulting fees as protection payments, documented the loans sharking through interest rates that were illegal, that were predatory, that trapped people in debt they could never escape. And through it all, Dante sat at the defense table, impassive and controlled, his expensive lawyers objecting and cross-examining, and doing everything they could to undermine her credibility, to suggest she was a scorned employee, a vengeful daughter, a manipulated witness who was being used by the FBI to pursue a vendetta against a legitimate businessman who was guilty of nothing more than being his father's son. The jury deliberated for 6 days, came back with guilty verdicts on 17 counts of racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Came back with a sentence that would keep Dante Russo in federal prison until he was 90 years old, until long after everyone he had hurt was dead, until his empire had crumbled and been forgotten and become nothing more than a footnote in Chicago's long history of organized crime. Claire did not feel victorious, did not feel like justice had been served, just felt tired, felt empty, felt like she had traded one prison for another, had escaped Richard's violence and Dante's control only to enter witness protection's cage, only to become someone new, someone without history, someone who would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder and wondering if today was the day someone found her, if today was the day the price for her testimony finally came due. Emma adjusted better than Claire expected. Children were resilient in ways adults forgot, were capable of accepting new normal with grace that came from not having decades of accumulated history weighing them down. She made friends in their new city, a mid-sized town in the Pacific Northwest, where no one knew them, where no one asked questions, where they could pretend to be ordinary people living ordinary lives. Claire found work as an accountant for a nonprofit, legitimate work, boring work, work that involved spreadsheets and grant applications and budgets for programs that helped people instead of exploiting them. It was not glamorous. It did not pay well, but it was honest. And after everything she had been through, honesty felt like luxury, felt like freedom, felt like the first real choice she had made in years. Richard was arrested 6 months after the trial, not for violating the restraining order, not for domestic violence, but for conspiracy to commit kidnapping. The FBI had evidence of his plan to take Emma, had recordings of conversations with the Russo associate who had taken his money, had testimony from people who had been willing to cooperate once the organization fell and self-preservation became more important than loyalty. He was sentenced to 15 years, would be 63 when he got out, would be old and broken and hopefully less dangerous to a daughter who would be 21 by then, who would be an adult, who would be able to make her own choices about whether to fear him or pity him or simply move on with a life he no longer had any power to touch. And Claire would be 52, would have spent 15 years in witness protection, would have raised Emma into adulthood in hiding, would have sacrificed her identity, her history, her connection to everything she had been before for the sake of justice and safety, and doing what her father had tried to do before it got him killed. On the anniversary of the verdict, she received a letter. No return address. Postmarked from a federal prison in Colorado. Inside was a single page, handwritten in careful script that she recognized from business documents, from the signature on contracts and memos, and all the paperwork of legitimate business that had covered up illegitimate empire. Claire, the letter began, I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. You did what you thought was right. I cannot fault you for that even as I spend the rest of my life paying for crimes I committed and crimes I inherited and crimes I failed to prevent. But I want you to know that Emma is safe, that the organization is gone, that the old soldiers who worked for my father have been arrested or died or scattered to other cities where they will be someone else's problem. The legitimate business was sold. The employees were absorbed into the company that bought it. No one lost their job. The drivers and warehouse workers and office staff who knew nothing about the criminal side, they are still working, still providing for their families. You worried about the consequences of my fall. I wanted you to know that I made sure the people who depended on me were taken care of before I let the empire collapse. It was the least I could do. The only good thing I could salvage from everything my father built on blood and fear. I hope you find peace. I hope Emma grows up happy. I hope you sleep well knowing you did what your father could not finish. He would be proud of you. I am certain of that. Dante. She burned the letter, did not keep it, did not want the reminder, did not want any connection to that life, to that world, to the man who had protected her and controlled her and forced her to make choices that no one should have to make. But she remembered the words, carried them with her. Let them settle into the space where guilt and grief and uncertainty lived, where questions about right and wrong existed without easy answers, where doing the hard thing did not always feel like doing the good thing. Years passed. Emma grew up, graduated high school with honors, accepted into a prestigious university on the East Coast, far from Chicago, far from the past that Claire had tried so hard to leave behind. The morning before Emma left for college, they sat together on the small porch of their house in the Pacific Northwest, drinking coffee as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that made everything seem possible, seem new, seem like the future could be different from the past if you were brave enough to choose it. I am going to study social work, Emma said, not for the first time, but with conviction that had grown over 4 years of high school, of volunteer work at women's shelters, of seeing what her mother had survived and deciding to help others survive too. I want to help women like you, women escaping abuse, women who need someone to believe them, to help them, to show them there is a way out. Claire felt tears well up, felt pride swell in her chest so large it hurt to breathe. You will be amazing at it. You already are. You never talk about him. Emma's voice was gentle, was careful, was the voice of someone who had learned to navigate difficult topics with grace. My father, Richard, what he did, what you survived. I only know pieces, from overhearing things, from filling in gaps. Will you tell me, now that I am old enough, now that I am going to be helping other people who have lived through what you lived through? Claire took a breath, held it, released it slowly. What do you want to know? Everything, how it started, how it got worse, how you got out, how you survived. Emma turned to face her fully, her young face so earnest, so determined, so much like Claire at that age before the world had taught her that determination was not always enough, that survival sometimes required compromises that left scars deeper than any physical wound. I need to understand, not just the facts, the feelings, the choices, the reasons why women stay, the reasons why leaving is so hard. I cannot help people if I do not understand. So Claire told her, Not everything. Not the parts that were too dark, too graphic, too likely to traumatize even an 18-year-old who thought she was ready to hear it all. But enough. The gradual escalation. The apologies that felt sincere. The promises to change that were never kept. The isolation from friends and family. The financial control. The fear that became so normal she stopped noticing it until someone pointed it out. The moment she realized that staying would kill her, that leaving might kill her too, but at least leaving gave her a chance. And Emma listened, asked questions, cried, held her mother's hand, understood in ways that Claire had feared she never would, in ways that made all the sacrifices feel worth it, feel necessary, feel like they had purpose beyond just survival. "I am proud of you, Mom." Emma's voice was thick with emotion. "For getting out, for keeping me safe, for doing the hard thing even when it cost you everything. You are the bravest person I know." "I do not feel brave." Claire wiped at her eyes, laughed shakily. "I feel like I just did what I had to do, like I made the only choices that let me live with myself." "That is what bravery is, making the hard choice when the easy one is right there." Emma squeezed her hand. "I want to be like you, strong like you, brave like you, willing to do the hard thing even when it costs everything." The conversation stayed with Claire long after Emma left for college, long after the house grew quiet and empty, long after the rhythm of her life changed from mother and daughter to woman alone with her choices and her memories, and the knowledge that she had raised someone good, someone strong, someone who would make the world better. On the 20th anniversary of her father's death, 42 years after he was killed in an alley trying to stop the Russo organization, Claire visited his grave for the first time since entering witness protection. It required FBI approval, required security protocols, required risk assessment and contingency planning, and all the machinery of protection that had defined her life for 2 decades. But they allowed it, gave her 2 hours, gave her space. Let her stand at the headstone that marked Christopher Morrison's final resting place and finally tell him what she had done, what it had cost, what she had preserved, and what she had lost. "I finished it, Dad." The words came out broken, came out through tears she had held back for 20 years. "I finished what you started. The organization is gone. The man who ordered your death is dead. His son is in prison. The empire is dismantled. It cost me everything. It cost Emma her childhood. It cost us our identities and our history and our connection to everything we were. But I finished it. I hope that means something. I hope you would be proud. I hope it was worth it." The wind carried her words away. The cemetery remained silent. The dead did not answer because the dead never answered, because closure was something the living created for themselves, because peace came not from external validation, but from internal acceptance that you had done what you could with what you were given, that you had made impossible choices and lived with the consequences, that you had tried to be brave even when bravery cost more than you could afford to pay. She left the cemetery, returned to the life she had built in hiding, returned to Emma, who was thriving at college, who called weekly with stories about her classes and her friends and the internship she had landed at a domestic violence advocacy organization, who was becoming exactly the kind of person who made sacrifices worthwhile. And that night, for the first time in 20 years, Claire slept without nightmares, slept without fear, slept with the certainty that whatever else she had lost, whatever else she had sacrificed, she had kept the promise that mattered most. She had kept Emma safe, had raised her daughter to be strong and compassionate and unafraid, had shown her that doing the right thing was possible even when it cost everything, even when it hurt, even when the price was so high that payment took decades and the debt was never fully settled. That was the accounting that mattered, not the ledgers marked paid in full, not the financial records that had sent Dante Russo to prison, not the testimony that had dismantled an empire, but the simple, profound arithmetic of a mother who had protected her child, who had chosen truth over comfort, who had finished what her father started, even knowing that finishing meant losing everything she had built, everyone she had been, every certainty she had possessed. The last accounting was complete. The debt was paid. The story was finished. And in the morning, Claire Morrison, who was no longer Claire Morrison, who had a different name now and a different life and a different future, would wake up and make breakfast and go to work and live the ordinary life that had cost her everything extraordinary to achieve. It was enough. It had to be, because it was all she had left. And sometimes, on the hardest days, when the weight of what she had sacrificed pressed down like guilt, like grief, like the ghost of choices that could not be unmade, she would remind herself of her father's face, of his courage, of the price he had paid for standing up to corruption. And she would know, in the deepest part of herself, where truth lived beneath all the lies and secrets and protective coloring, that she had honored his memory the only way that mattered. By refusing to let his death be meaningless, by finishing what he started, by ensuring that his sacrifice bought something more than just another generation of victims, another cycle of violence, another empire built on blood. By breaking the cycle, by ending the story, by closing the ledger one final time with her own hand and her own choice and the absolute certainty that some things, some people, some principles were worth any price. Even the price of everything. This story hit differently than I expected. Claire's choice, testify against the man who protected her daughter, or let her father's murder go unpunished. There's no clean answer. That's what haunts me. Question for you veterans and fathers out there. If you were Claire, knowing Dante's protection kept Emma safe from Richard, could you destroy him? Or does a father's legacy demand justice regardless of the cost? Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment. And if this moral dilemma gripped you like it did me, hit subscribe. I've got more stories where right and wrong aren't black and white. What would you do?